Science is now thought to be the bastion of truth. It's what we look for if we really want truth, because they do experiments and such. But the reality is that I think it was 2012, Nature, which is probably the most prestigious science journal in the world, had an article that it was a kind of an expose. And it looked at a number of landmark papers in the area of cancer research and found that there was 89% of them. We're talking landmark papers here, not just some stuff on trivial side issues. Landmark papers, 89% could not be reproduced when they tried to reproduce the results in the lab. 89%. 4 years later, they ran another article. And that article, by the way, created a huge controversy in the field of science. And was that a one-off deal? I have about 20 or 25 articles now, all talking about this problem in experimental science. And 4 years later, Nature did another article, and they said, this is actually the norm. Like, by norm, the word norm means it's normal that peer-reviewed science papers in science journals can't be reproduced. And that doesn't mean they all can't. It's just more can't, the majority can't be reproduced, let's say over 50%. Now, it might be quite a bit more than that, although now there's a huge effort to try and solve this problem, so that problem may be slowly rectified. But here's what caused it. In that second article, around 2016, I think it was, it says it talked about perverse incentives. So human nature is actually, see, the problem is you got humans involved in science, experimental science, and human nature steps up to
bringing humans in.
Yeah, what could go wrong, eh? Human nature. We got humans involved. So what happens is they call perverse incentives as competition for funding, academic prestige, and the pressure to publish papers. Those three things. So in science, whenever you see a lot of funding going into a particular area, you'll have competition for that funding, and it'll be particularly bad as far as reproducibility in their science papers. So,
but isn't the point of peer reviewing to get people to reproduce it?
Yeah. Well, no, they don't reproduce it. Like I'm a scientist, and I've been sent papers by various journals to do as a reviewer. They want me to review these papers. Normally, if it's too far to my field, unless it's in my field, I just say I'm not qualified to review this paper. But even a paper in my field, reading through these highly technical papers is like taking a general anesthetic. First of all, it's a supreme effort to just focus well enough so that you are not just understanding the paper, but you can actually critique it. You can actually see, is there a problem here? So it's a big effort, first of all, to just read through it. And secondly, I don't have the time to start up a lab and run an experiment for 3 or 4 years to see if I can reproduce those results. I do not have the time. And this is the number one problem with peer review, is that almost never is an attempt made to review is to try and reproduce the experimental results, because the experiment itself is so complex and so expensive and requires so much time, we just can't do it. But the reason that I raised science in the first place is here's my point. If science itself is having serious problems with reproducibility because of human nature, then how bad is the rest of what we think is true? How bad is that if we can't take these things to a lab and reproduce them or test them out? And a lot of what people believe today in our culture cannot be taken to a lab. Interesting, though, there's a ton of papers in the humanities, especially to do with sexuality. There was a group of professors at Simon Fraser University showed that most of those papers, the vast majority, let's say 90%, actually seem to have decided ahead of time what results they want. And then they do their sampling with, they do selective sampling, they will massage the stats and so forth, and they actually fail miserably in one area, and the one area is the statistical credibility of the paper. So there's another case where we tend, as humans, we tend to have a result. And another student in a university nearby said, a PhD student who's working in a cancer lab says, the professor tells us at the beginning of the experiment what results we are to have, and then we need to make it happen. And that lab was eventually shut down. After several years, it was eventually shut down, several years after the whistles started to be blown.